requests from people who can't make the talk for us to record. So if you do not wish to be seen, please turn your video to off, because we will be starting the recording in a minute. So I'll let you do that. So Zuleika Gallery, it really is a thrill, and we've had such positive feedback, and it's really a joy to see it finally hung in the gallery. We were hoping to start the exhibition in February, so it's been a little bit delayed, but it's been well worth the wait. I think probably without further ado, I'd like to, well, I'm going to introduce you, let Rosanna take the floor in a second, just a little bit of housekeeping. We're going to do a tour of the exhibition, because there are quite a few of us on the Zoom. Rosanna's going to talk us through, and we're going to move around so it's as close as it can be for you, as if you're coming to the gallery. And we will leave time for questions at the end. So we'll leave about 10 minutes at the end for questions. But if there's anything burning, please do put it into the chat box, and we'll see if we can come to it, or we'll turn to the questions at that point. But without further ado, thank you so much for joining us. And Rosanna, welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me. And thank you everyone for coming. I can't see you all, but hello. It's very nice to have you all here at Alchemy, where I'm currently sat surrounded by my paintings, which is a very lovely feeling. But yeah, so
well, I wondered if you could start by telling us a bit about your amazing practice, which is for those of you who haven't read about, or perhaps don't know, Rosanna is very much an environmentalist, and she's got sustainability at the core of her practice, and it's all about the environment and man's impact on the world around her, and the materials you use are very important. And I was reading that you use, if I can list them, I think in itself it sounds like a bit of an alchemy: a volcanic ash, dust, rain, charcoal, soot, sand, and bee pollen, just among a few. I wonder if you could talk to us about your materials and how you came to this kind of practice.
Yeah, of course. So I guess I'd always loved painting and working with, you know, traditional paint media when I was younger, and I think it was at university when I started sort of really engaging with materiality. So I spent my first year doing sculpture because I'd never had access to a sculpture studio before. So I thought I'll throw myself into that and have fun with it. It wasn't my medium, and I went back to painting, which was always the plan in my second year. But having that kind of time when you're really working with materials kind of changed the way that I approached my painting. So I spent the second and third year of my degree kind of really trying to be as playful with it as possible, and that kind of led to I don't know, I guess I was kind of attracted to more unconventional processes, and I was always coming back to natural processes and the elements and ways of using them on a canvas or on some wood, and kind of allowing the painting to be driven by that process. And obviously, naturally, that kind of, as soon as you're engaging with nature, you can't really deny the sustainability and, you know, the current climate crisis. So that has been a kind of organic process that's been going on since I was studying. And I think when I left uni and I think it was around the time I got my first studio, I was like, right, I'm going to really look into materials and I'm going to explore them more. So I started playing with different types of ash, which I'd done at university. I played with wood ashes and smoke and everything. And I was like, right, okay, so what other kinds of, you know, natural materials are there out there, which is where I started experimenting with volcanic ash and rock dust. And just the further into my practice I've got, the kind of deeper I've gone into those very elemental kind of base materials that kind of make up the world around us, and the kind of symbolism that they carry with them, which I find really interesting.
And where do you source your materials, Rosanna? I mean, that's also, how do you collect bee pollen, for example?
Bee pollen I've got from a bunch of places. So I usually start, if I'm kind of, if I have an idea in my head about a weird material that I want to kind of get to grips with, if it's not something that I'm able to collect in my immediate surroundings out in nature, then I'll usually experiment with kind of getting hold of anything I can. So I think with the bee pollen, it started with, I saw it in a health food shop. They had this raw bee pollen and I was like, I wonder what it's like to paint with that. So I bought some and it smells amazing. And I started just grinding it up. I've got, you know, a kind of very alchemical setup in the studio where I kind of grind pigments and everything. And it sort of started there. And then I was kind of, a lot of it's research online. And then obviously you're kind of looking into where you're sourcing stuff from. So the ethics of it, the transport, how that's impacting the environment, because obviously it's a can of worms once you start going down the production route. So I think I've probably got about 5 types of pollen now from local beekeepers and a couple of my original health food purchases, which were my kind of experimental phase. And the ashes, the volcanic ash, which everyone always asks me where I get it from. No, I haven't been down into a volcano and collected it. It comes from Iceland mostly. That's the closest kind of volcanic activity that we've got here, so it has the least environmental impact to get it shipped over, and it's sent over by local people in Iceland who live literally at the bottom of these incredible volcanoes, and they send it over in little sachets or little jars, and yeah, and it arrives in the post and it's wonderful. It's amazing stuff. I would highly recommend anyone, you know, getting hold of some and really play with it. But yeah, it's about kind of sourcing stuff where I can, but really trying to have as little impact as possible, which is difficult. It's a difficult thing for anyone to do, I think, sourcing anything.
I wondered if you can share us some of your paintings which have, I thought maybe we could start with Salt and Ash and you can share us those we've got in the exhibition. I can see one behind you, for example.
Round. Okay, so that is like, can you see that? I can't really see the thumbnail very well.
Perfect.
That's the full view. But you kind of get a better impression of it, I think, as you get closer. You get the texture. So basically this one is a lot of layers, and I mean a lot of layers of volcanic ash and rock dust. So these take months to layer up. It's not, as you can imagine, the most stable material, so you really have to layer it incredibly thinly. You have to mix it with the right kind of medium, and I think this one's probably about 40 to 60 layers of ash, but you'll see you kind of, the volcanic ash will give you, sorry, I'm just trying to hold this iPad with one hand. You'll get these kind of cakey, pasty bits where the volcanic ash, that's if you put it on quite thick, it goes very, very pasty, almost like toothpaste. Any wood ashes give you a far more kind of speckled kind of effect. So like this kind of bit here, there's my finger there, this kind of stuff. And these larger bits of texture are all volcanic rock dust, which isn't the sort of thing that's expelled from a volcano during an eruption. It's the sort of thing that builds up in sediment over millions of years. So that's actually from Scotland. But yeah, these are my ash ones. That's kind of an ongoing series. I'm a bit obsessed with ash, which you will all come to know.
Amazing. Shall we look at your smoke paintings as now, Rosanna?
Yeah. Okay, so I'll now take you around to the smallest pieces that I have in the exhibition. So this one is a study for a fire painting. And if you kind of, I think, do let me know if I'm holding this at the wrong angle, please. This painting is completely started with fire. So that kind of shadowy effect that you're getting there is smoke. That was a process that I started at uni, experimenting with fire. I think it's, you know, it's such a kind of base element. It's constantly kind of rearing its head in my work. And the smoke that it leaves behind gives this really beautiful kind of shadowy effect. And then I've built on top of that with mixed media. So I think you've got some acrylic, and you've got ink and wax and salt, all kind of built up on that on parchment. But yeah, fire's been an ongoing thing. I think that's clearly what led into the world of ash and volcanoes. But yeah, and then on the opposite side, you've got Study for an Ice Painting, which is kind of a new thing. I'm really interested in the kind of, I guess, the sort of the balance between fire and ice. So in a similar fashion to using the smoke from a fire to paint the other one, I've actually frozen ink and water, and then allowed that to kind of melt onto the paper. And then I've used salt to kind of help the process along. Salt I use a lot in all of my pieces because it's just a fascinating material. It does wonderful things to pigments, and it's also so representative of life and death. So there's salt on most of them. And then, shall I talk about the flood?
Yes, please.
Okay. Okay, so this one, I'm going to have to lean back quite fast so you can see it. This is one of two that I've got in the exhibition, which are part of my After the Flood series. So the process itself involves laying the canvas completely flat and flooding it. So you literally, the canvas is sat in kind of several millimeters of water, and then you paint onto that water with anything really. I mean, on this one I've used kind of acrylics and inks, salt again, and sand. And over time the water will kind of dissolve and disappear, and the pigment will then land on the canvas below and settle completely naturally. And that takes, I think this one took about 4 or 5 days for the water to disappear. So you've kind of got very little control over how it looks. It looks completely different when it's wet. The colors are different, but that's kind of the point, I suppose. I mean, when I'm painting these flood ones, I'll take you around and see the other one. There, I guess I'm kind of thinking about that whole thing about how, you know, we tend to try to control nature, and obviously water's a big one that we try to control a lot. So I was interested in the idea of kind of letting it do its thing, and take complete control of the painting. Obviously you've also got connotations of, you know, the flood being a bad thing. You know, people don't like floods. Floods are destructive, they're terrible for humans and for wildlife, but they also serve a purpose in, you know, the grander scheme of things, in biodiversity, in shaping the land. So yeah, they're kind of an ongoing series. I think there's gonna be a few more of these flood ones coming out.
This particular one, Rosanna's had a lot of people have been very interested in it, and I think it's so beautiful. It looks almost like an aerial view of you know, a river as well. It's really evocative, and you've got some gold in there. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, I do. So I've been asked this a lot, actually. I often put little kind of spots of liquid gold into the work. And that is largely to, basically, we kind of, obviously we think of gold as being, you know, it represents wealth and it represents money and it represents everything that we kind of put on a pedestal. So I was interested in using gold as a way of highlighting these kind of natural processes and these natural kind of aesthetics and the kind of things that we normally will try and hide or kind of harness or hold at bay. I was interested in kind of picking them out in gold, to kind of show that actually these things are, you know, they're beautiful and they're something that we should be protecting and thinking about, and not constantly kind of, you know, serving the human purpose by keeping everything neat and tidy and clinical. I don't know if that's really picking it up. There we go, that's a bit better. So yeah, it's basically a case of kind of you'll do the flood painting on this one, for example, and then go through and kind of pick out all of those textures that have just naturally landed on the canvas in gold, to kind of celebrate them rather than hide them.
Well, it's wonderful to hear they're going to be more, because it's been very popular.
People love a bit of gold.
Shall we move to the really alchemistic work, the copper ones?
Yes. So the copper ones, we've got this one and this one in this room. These are a relatively new series, actually. So I think when you're working with materials, especially natural materials like the elements and everything, you're kind of naturally going to be drawn to metals and the way that metals will transform depending on what they come into contact with. So after a lot of experimentation, I kind of got this process sorted where I'm using copper pigment on canvas, so it's not metal itself, and then oxidizing the whole thing. So that canvas starts out this beautiful, pure, shiny copper. Same with this one. And then the whole thing is oxidized again in a very kind of raw and unmanaged process in a way, because you're not applying paint to the canvas, you're applying salt water or chemicals, or, you know, even stuff like coffee. As long as it's got a different kind of pH balance, it's going to oxidize the copper for you. And then over about 3 or 4 days, depending on the materials you've used, they'll start to, you know, turn to this lovely kind of turquoise color, which I've always been fascinated by. I used to love looking at copper on roofs and everything. So yeah, these ones have been very fun to work on. They're very relaxing. But again, it's that kind of thing of, you know, people tend to not want things to oxidize, and they tend to not want things to discolor because of nature. So I'm trying to embrace that with this new series. And hopefully you guys will too. And we've got another one through here actually, which is copper. You can just see through there. We'll go and have another look at that one in a minute. And then we've got another one which has some copper, but this one's actually mostly iron pigment. Don't know if you guys can see it very well. It's got the light behind it, so it's not the best angle. But yeah, it's the same process, but using iron pigment. So that's mixed in places where you can see the blue coming through, that's copper. And then these lovely deep reds for iron. So again, that will start off in a really dark iron grey and oxidized with all manner of things that you kind of throw on it just to see what kind of chemical reactions you're going to get. I mean, alchemy itself is all about transformation. So the paintings are kind of chemical experiments on canvas. which are great fun to do.
So with these ones, Rosanna,
Yeah.
we're on them. You talk about sort of throwing copper. Is it sort of, is it painted? Is it, how is it transferred to the canvas? And is there painting in it?
Yeah, so the actual the paint that holds the metal pigment, whether that's the copper or the iron, will be applied traditionally with a brush or a roller. You'll kind of apply about 3 coats to the canvas and let that sort of settle. So that's a very traditional way of painting, and it's once that's then sort of drying or dried, that's when the kind of the traditional painting process kind of goes out the window a little bit, because you're then either grinding stuff into it with your hands or kind of sprinkling stuff, throwing stuff at it, leaving it out in the rain. It's all very experimental, to be honest, but that's kind of what I've always liked with my painting. It's about being free and kind of accepting what nature and the world throws at you, and it just works very nicely on a material that's reactive, because you kind of got this painting appearing before your eyes that you're not entirely in control of. Yeah, I think you can see it. And then I will take you around. There's another similar one here. So again, this is copper and iron. You can see there's a lot more copper being used on this one, which is bringing out that nice turquoise. Just take you through some of the textures. So you kind of, depending on the materials that you're applying to it, or the amount of water or the type of water that you're using, you're going to get a different effect in different parts of the world, depending on how hard the water is. You get kind of all manner of changes of pigment, but I mean, this all starts off as one colour. And then there's no other colours applied to it. It's a really lovely material to work with.
So we have a question for you, Rosanna, which is, how long do the chemical processes and reactions take to develop? And now that happened, you know, does the chemical reaction carry on, or does it stabilize at some point? When do you know it's kind of fixed? I guess it's
okay. So this image that you're looking at now, to go from the kind of blanket color to this, for it to settle, it takes anything from 3 days to a week for the oxidation process to sort of finish and settle. If you were working with traditional metals, that might continue going on forever, but because of the type of pigment that I'm using and the way it's bound in the medium, it's relatively stable. Obviously, if you were to put this outside in the rain again, you're going to get more reaction going on the canvas. If you were to apply, you know, a load of heat or throw a glass of water at it, you'd get a reaction. I mean, obviously,
when you talk about
people won't do that.
When you talk about putting it outside in the rain in such a casual way, I mean, most artists would be absolutely horrified to have their canvases outside in the rain. But you, it's like an integral part.
I like it. I don't know. I've never really subscribed to that kind of. I've got so much respect for artists that have, you know, that kind of precise way of working. But precision doesn't really come into my work so much. It's all about experimentation, and obviously you put a canvas out in the rain, sometimes that's going to go horribly wrong, or it's just not going to work, and it's, you know, you have to do a lot of work to get to a finished piece that you're happy with. But it's the fun of it for me. It's why I paint. I like to feel free when I'm doing it. I like it to be unrestricted by kind of convention, especially human convention. You know,
another question which I think is quite similar in a way, it's the question is, how do you, if the picture gets to a particular state that you enjoy, can you kind of fix it there? You know, do you have control on that, or, you know, are you able to sort of stop it and decide, right, that's enough now? And, you know, so you're in some kind of control, even though it's kind of experimental and at the will of, you know, nature? Or is it, you know, once you've set up, you know, it's a sort of controlled process of being uncontrolled, is what I'm trying to say. But so you must know from experience, okay, that might just go a bit wrong, that's gone too far, or I think this will happen like this. And
Yeah,
you're able to stop it if you want to.
yes. So I mean, if you kind of, I guess it was a learning process for me. The first time I started working with metal pigments, I was like, okay, I'm going to put this on the canvas and I'm going to throw a load of stuff at it and see what happens. And exactly that, you get about halfway through and you go, oh my God, I really like this. And then the whole thing goes blue. And it's like, oh, right, okay, so there has to be some element of, you know, back and forth going on here. So at that point, I mean, you don't have control over the whole thing. I mean, you can't, without using stencils or making the whole thing precise, you can't control the image that's going to appear. But what you can do is be patient and apply it in layers. So, you know, if you're wanting to guide where those colors are coming through, then you've got to kind of, you know, add a little bit, see what happens, add a little bit more, see what happens. It's all experimentation and kind of, you know, you have to fail several times and try, you know, several different kind of methods before you finally settle on one that's going to work for you.
There's another interesting question on your process, which I think is quite intriguing.
Mm-hmm.
And she says, do you see yourself taking greater control of process, or even loosening the process as you kind of grow yourself, you know, as an artist? You might decide that you want to go one way or the other.
Okay, that's a tricky one. I think without, you know, subscribing to either school of thought, I think probably I'm heading in the less control direction, because that's where I find the kind of the freedom with painting, and I think that's where my interest in environment comes in. You know, I'm not a painter that sits down and thinks about what image I want to appear. I think more about the materials that I'm using. Or, you know, the kind of the part of the world that I'm thinking about, the walk that I've been on. It's, you know, it's all reactionary rather than planned. I don't see myself getting to a stage where I'm wanting to plan these, because I think it's at that point that they kind of lose their potency somehow. But you never know. Never say never. Who knows? But at the moment, I'm very much interested in you know, seeing how they form themselves. You know, it's as exciting for me as someone who's, you know, walks into the studio to kind of see what they're doing. But I do draw and stuff, just for myself. You know, there's a lot to be said for the more traditional methods. But yeah, and I'll just quickly show you this one, which this is an older piece. So this one I started working on when I was studying at Brookes. This one's actually on metal. So I suppose the nice thing about having this one in the exhibition is it kind of shows where that interest in metal and oxidization was starting to come in. So this was a load of household chemicals, and my first forays into copper pigment applied to the metal, and then they were left out over one winter at first. I brought them in, thought they were finished, and then left them outside over another winter for the elements to really kind of bite into the metal. So again, there's a real lack of control about what you're actually going to end up producing with something like that. But I suppose that was one of the first telltale signs I was about to go down this very elemental route. But yeah.
And that's quite interesting also, because that I can say it's a diptych, but it's a sort of it's a series of panels. Have you done that since or before? It seems like it's quite an early work. Was it a one-off, or have you returned to that idea of a series of panels? I think you're on mute, Rosanna.
Sorry. It's the only one that I've done in panels, I think. I don't think I was intending them to necessarily be shown together. It was more of an experiment at the time. I had these 4 panels and I thought, okay, I'm going to apply stuff to them. You know, you can see that they've got varying levels with slightly different chemicals on each of them. It was only when I started to kind of dig them up and bring them in and, you know, kind of wash the loose dirt off them and see what painting was forming, that I decided that actually they should stick together. But yeah, it's definitely something I could revisit. I think apart from anything else, I'm used to working big, so having the 4 together felt right to me.
Lots of interesting questions coming in the chat, Rosanna.
Okay. I will go and sit down.
Yeah, I was going to say, do take a seat, it might be easier.
Chat to you.
And we can take some live questions as well, but we've had some questions about, and I was interested to ask you this as well, about your artistic influences and heroes. As somebody has mentioned, think of artists who've used similar oxidization, such as Warhol, Signa Polk, John Keane. Who do you see as your influences, Rosanna?
Okay, so I mean, we studied a lot of that. I suppose that was, you know, where the oxidization was starting to come in. But weirdly, like I've got like a weird, not a weird, but like probably a list of artists that really inspire me that aren't necessarily directly linked with that kind of thing. I mean, I love Anselm Kiefer's paintings because we've got that, you know, there's the ash, the relevance of ash there, and I every time I look at his work, it's like an amazing thing. Then artists like Kaigo Kiang, I may be saying his name wrong, and I'm just so sorry if I am. But he's a Chinese artist who works with fire and gunpowder, and his paintings are just incredible. He's got a real performative element to them, which I find really inspiring. And he's just so kind of engaged with his material. And then painters like, well, I don't know whether you call her a painter or an installation artist, but Valerie Hegarty. Again, I'm not sure if I'm actually pronouncing her name right. But she's been an influence since I was studying, because I love how subversive her work is. I love the fact that she's more interested in how something sort of destroyed or something that's kind of decaying can be really beautiful.
So there are a couple of questions which are quite similar coming in about sort of how your work evolved, you know, the journey from, we sort of seen the earliest one in the exhibition here, and whether there's a sort of journey within the exhibition of you know, one series followed on from another, and also in terms of like how your work has evolved, whether you've actually documented it, you know, in terms of how you've moved from between your processes and where you're going. How do you?
Okay, well, I think within this exhibition, the work with metal pigments is definitely the kind of latest venture. It's something I've thought about for a long time, but it's, you know, it's a new sort of material to be working with. But I think the kind of ongoing things for me are working with fire and ash. So that's something I've been doing for a long time, and I'm pretty sure I'm going to continue to do for a long time, because I love working with the elements and I find them fascinating. I find nature fascinating, but because of the undeniable environmental issues that we've got going on at the moment, I'm sort of finding myself funneled more and more down the down a route that kind of confronts materials and processes that are destructive by nature, because, you know, we're we're living on the brink of a potential extinction event. We can't pretend that that's not happening. So that's something that's on my mind a lot. It's something I think about in my practice and out of my practice. So those kind of materials that revolve around these big destructive events, or that kind of have that duality of growth and decay, or life and death, like I'm sort of being sucked that direction more and more. But it's something that's kind of always been there. I think it's just it's getting stronger now that I mean, you can't really look away from the issue. So
a couple of that's really amazing. And I think that's why we all love your work, because you're really tackling these issues head on with your processes and subject matter. And you know, they really do resonate.
thank you.
We've had a couple of other questions, if I can go through them in the chat, and then we can open up to people maybe asking on the video. One is about what do you think could happen if what sort of chemical processes and reactions might you expect if the painting is exposed to humidity? Is that an environment that you've thought about? It's not very Oxfordshire.
It's not very Oxfordshire. It might be, yeah, it's definitely something to explore. I mean, I think in future, yeah, it's definitely an area that could be really interesting, especially with the reactive paints, because, you know, I mean, I suppose it would involve
climate change as well. Maybe as the world heats up, it could be something.
Yeah, well, exactly. I mean, and a project that I'm kind of, it's not sort of humidity based, but my next project will be looking at looking directly at the kind of the increased temperatures across the globe, but more looking at the way that's affecting ice, and then the knock-on effect that ice will be having around the globe and around on carbon emissions. And, that's obviously tied up with heat and everything. So I mean, it could be something that comes into that project or that conversation, but it's kind of I don't know, I suppose it's a different part of the world. Humidity. I'm very much northward pointing at the moment.
And then another question about your influences, but in terms of the environment, and whether, because your studio is in Oxfordshire, whether that's the particular place that's been inspiring you. Is there any particular landscapes that inspire you?
Oh, okay. So I love Oxfordshire. I'm not about to knock it. It's beautiful. I'm very, very lucky to be living here. It's not a wild and elemental place. It's beautiful, and we've got a lot of nature around us, but it's all quite manicured. And you know, it's very kind of well looked after nature. I'm more interested in big, epic, wild landscapes. So I suppose if I was to pick a few landscapes that were most inspiring, it would be Scotland, Iceland, anywhere that's, you know, you've got mountains and you've got sea and you've got these kind of ancient big landscapes that kind of swallow you up the moment that you enter them. I think they're so important. I think it's important for people to remember how actually we're really small, and going into an environment like that, it just, all of that kind of everything to do with society and everyday stresses, it all melts away. And I think that's important for the soul. So that, as well as the fact that we need to protect spaces like that in order to, you know, keep the planet nice and healthy. Definitely, yeah. It's big wild places do it for me. But I do love Oxfordshire. It's very pretty.
Amazing. Well, I just wanted, if we wanted to open up questions to, you know, if anyone wanted to ask Rosanna a question directly, or as she's there in the gallery right now, this is your chance to take another look at the picture more closely again. We can, you know, do another walk around. Please feel free to unmute yourself.
We got any unmute?
I think everyone's just in awe. It's been amazing, Rosanna. And I think we're all really excited to see what you're going to do next. It's such considered work, and did somebody want to ask something? And I think, it's just really relevant, for now. And I think you've got a really exciting career ahead of you. We're just so excited here to have been able to be a part of it at the beginning. And we're looking forward to seeing, where you're going to go next and what you're going to do.
Thank you very much. I'm excited to be here.
Oh, I think there might be a question.
Can I just ask something?
Hi, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, they do look absolutely amazing in a gallery setting, but I just wondered, as they're so elemental and so wild, whether you thought about putting them in an environmental setting, an outdoor setting, that would be possible.
It's very funny that you should say that, because that's actually something that I've started thinking about just this year. So I think partly being in lockdown, being kind of stuck in the studio, or in just having that few miles radius, and you're really stuck there. I think that got me thinking about where I was placing my work. If I'm painting outside, it's lent against a nice stone wall, or lent against a tree. And for the first time this year, I started kind of considering where I document my work. Possibly, I suppose that could be a show at some point. I mean, logistically, have to work that out, but in terms of documenting it, I've actually started, if you go onto my website, you'll see I've started kind of putting it into either natural environments or human spaces that are starting to be reclaimed by nature. So yeah, it's funny that you should bring that up. It's definitely going to be more of a thing in my practice, I think.
Well, thank you so much, Rosanna. I think that's been fantastic. If anyone has any more questions, please do feel free to get in touch with us after the Zoom, and we can always ask Rosanna if you've got anything that has come to mind later. And we do hope you might find the time to come and see us and Rosanna's exhibition, which is continuing. And I do think, while it's wonderful doing a Zoom with all these amazing techniques and the 40 layers of salt and ash in particular, it's really worth seeing them in the flesh to really appreciate these amazing techniques. So thank you all. I hope you all have a wonderful Friday evening and a lovely weekend, and don't get too wet tomorrow. Thank you, everybody from Zuleika.
Thank you very much, everyone. I'll be out painting in the rain.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello.
Thank you, Rosanna. Thank you. We loved your work so much. You're amazing.
You guys.
Very moving as well. Bye. Hello. Bye.
Bye. She's so pretty.